So just to sort of recap, in case you weren't here when we started this series, Psalm after Psalm after Psalm is a maskless expression to God about the way life feels. The Psalms are so honest. We find in the Psalms, in all 150 Psalms, we find Psalms of praise, Psalms of lament, Psalms of thanksgiving. And in every Psalm, there is such brutal honesty. The psalmist, whether it's David or somebody else, is expressing to God the way life actually feels. Psalm after psalm after psalm teach us to ask God hard questions, to thank Him, to argue with Him, to praise Him, and to ultimately trust Him when we don't understand what He's doing. They give us words when we're thankful. They give us words when we're sad. They give us words when we're scared. They give us words when we're mad and confused and happy. The Psalms are a gift to us in that regard. They give us words to say when we can't come up with the right verbiage. The Psalms give us permission to express joy and fear and frustration and gratitude and grief and anger and awe and desperation and depression and love and longing. All of those emotions are found in the Psalms. They're such an emotionally honest portion of the Bible. They give us the okay to feel what we're feeling without apology, and to be honest with God about all of it, to sort of express those emotions Godward. I have felt a ton of emotion this last month, overwhelmingly so, for a handful of reasons. Getting away from everything is a good thing for us to do from time to time. It gives us a time to rest, but it also gives us a time to reflect. And this was a big month for me in a lot of different ways, in a lot of unexpected ways. It was a big month. It was an emotionally overwhelming month in all good ways, to be honest with you. From the birth of my third grandson to spending time with family, both in Texas and in North Carolina, numerous 50th birthday celebrations, just things that people have said and written and things that I've reflected on have just made this month overwhelmingly emotional for me. I have found myself reflecting on a variety of different psalms when I haven't had the words to say, when I haven't been able to come up with the verbiage to express myself to God. Various psalms have given me the verbiage. A lot of praise psalms I have spent time reading. A lot of thanksgiving psalms I have spent time reading. God has freshly, over the last month, filled my heart with gratitude for everything He has done for me and for everything He has given to me. Turning 50 hit me in such a humbling way, to be honest with you. I don't really think about that stuff. You know, it's a number. I mean, it plays games with my head, like 50 sounds old to me, but I don't feel old. And I know some of you guys who actually are old are looking at me like I'm still young. Thank you for your encouragement. Keep saying that stuff. But it impacted me in an unexpected way. In a surprising way. I told Stacy a couple months ago, I said, I don't want to do anything like big I feel pressure to perform if we have any big celebration. I don't want that. So she honored my request by throwing 4 different birthday celebrations. Thank you, honey. But I didn't really think about it other than, okay, it's another day and the year, and I'll get past it and move on, and life goes on, and nothing really changes, you know. But something did change. It may be just a matter of semantics, but I would probably call what I'm going to do this morning a testimony more than a sermon. I want to give God thanks for my life. My whole life, the ups, the downs, and there's been plenty of both. The good times, the hard times, the bad times, the good stuff, the hard stuff, the fun stuff, the not so fun stuff. God's goodness and faithfulness and love and care and attention for me over the last 50 years has been overwhelming for me to reflect on. Overwhelming. I've been blown away. I've probably cried more tears of gratitude in the last month than ever before. At surprising moments, in some very surprising moments. This isn't going to mean a whole lot to you guys, but I'll do my best to explain it. I told Stacy last night at dinner, I'm like, this is the scene in a particular documentary that's been coming to mind over the last month regarding the way I feel, but I can't really share it because nobody will know what I'm talking about. And here I am sharing it, and I'm going to do my best to explain it. In like 2005 or 2006, this movie/documentary came out called Riding Giants, and it was the history of big wave surfing. It's an amazing documentary. It's an amazing movie. If you're not into surfing, you've never surfed, you don't care about it, it's still an amazing story. Amazing story. It goes back and talks about the beginning of surfing, the origins of surfing, and it sort of evolves into big wave surfing and some of the best big wave riders in the world today. People who have surfed big waves and people who are currently surfing big waves. And probably the most well-known big wave rider, at least in the last generation, is a guy by the name of Laird Hamilton. Laird is a Hawaiian guy. He's white, blonde-headed guy, but he grew up in Hawaii. He's been surfing his entire life. He's a big guy. He's married to Gabriella Reese, who's, I think she was a volleyball player or something like that. Yeah. Anyway, they live in Hawaii. He's been pushing the envelope of big wave surfing for a long, long, long time. He's been a real pioneer. And he's a larger-than-life character. He's got a big body, a big personality. He takes on big challenges in the ocean, some surprisingly big, scary challenges. You watch some of the footage of him surfing some of these waves, and you think he's nuts, which I think he is, partially nuts for surfing some of the waves that he has surfed. He's invented a lot of things that have been innovative in the world of surfing. But probably back in, I don't know, it was the early 2000s, I think it was. He heard about a wave in Tahiti at a place called Chopu. And from what he heard, this is the most fiercest, strongest, most powerful wave in the world. Never to shrink back from a challenge, he made his way over to Chopu, and they have footage of him catching this wave. He was towed into this wave. If you don't know what that means instead of the old-fashioned ways of surfing where you paddle out, you sit on your board, you wait for a wave. When you see one, you paddle into it. Well, for big wave surfing, it's almost impossible to paddle out and to paddle and catch a wave, and so they tow you with a boat or with, a jet ski or something like that. I don't think they call them jet skis anymore, but whatever they're called now. So they get towed into these waves. So he gets towed into this wave, and this thing is fierce. And I mean, it's thick and it's powerful and it's big and there's a razor sharp reef right under the surface. So if he doesn't ride this thing perfectly, he's finished. He's done. So he is, in a very real way, holding on for dear life on this wave. And he makes it. He makes the drop and he makes it out on the other side. And they interviewed his stepdad, who basically raised him. They interviewed his stepdad after that, and he said, from that point on, Laird was a different guy. He was so, I think, humbled by the force of this wave that he realized perhaps for the first time in his life how small he was. And I don't know why, I actually do know why, but that scene of that documentary and his stepfather's comment about the way that changed him has been what I've reflected on for the last month. It has made me feel, this last month has made me feel appropriately small in the face of such a massive and forceful wave of grace over my life for the last 50 years. When I think in detail about the way God has ministered to me, provided for me, the gifts he has given me, none of which I've earned, by the way, or deserved, none. God's attention to me, his care for me, his provision for me, his love for me, his desire for me has been unwavering, uninterrupted for 50 years. Little detailed ways in which he has gifted things and people to me. I've been reflecting a lot on the family that I was born into, the mother, the father, the siblings, the grandparents, aunts, uncles, the way God loved me through those people. I always knew I was loved. Always. I was born into a home and born into a family in which I knew two things. They loved me and God loved me. Those were two things that were so clear to me from the moment I came into this world. That is a gift. When I baptized Luca a few weeks ago, my grandson, and I said at the beginning of the baptism that there's always a lot of confusion inside and outside the church regarding what's actually happening when we baptize a baby, okay? Because there are some traditions that baptize babies and some Christian traditions that don't baptize babies. I happen to come from a tradition that does baptize babies because it's the right thing to do, okay? Nevertheless, the point is that people sometimes think that baptism is a demonstration or a declaration of our commitment and love to God, but it's not. Baptism is first and foremost a declaration and a demonstration of God's commitment and love to us. That's why baptizing a baby is such a beautiful picture of the way God loves us. We've got nothing to give. Nothing. We come empty-handed, and God blesses us and says, I love you. Not because of who you are or the commitment you've made to me. That's not it. I love you because I love you. And when I baptized Luca, one of the things I said was, it is no small thing that this child is going to grow up in a home where he's going to hear about Jesus, where he's going to hear about God's love for him, where he's going to hear about God. There are millions and millions of children born into millions and millions of families every year where they never hear about God. They never hear about Jesus, ever. And so for God to sovereignly place this child under the care of other Christians is a significant thing. Well, I've reflected on that in my own life. What God has blessed me with, what God has given to me. And I have felt appropriately small in the face of such a massive and forceful wave of grace. Well, this Psalm 139 is about how good God is in detail. In other words, his goodness to us is not some generic goodness, it's a detailed goodness. It's a specific goodness. It's been said that the deepest human desire is to be both fully known and fully loved at the same time. And we fear that we can have one, but we can't have both. We fear that if we are fully known, we won't be fully loved. If we are fully known, we won't be fully loved because there are things about us that people can't love, won't love. And if we're fully loved, we fear it's because we're not fully known. And so there's this endless search, this quest to be both fully known and fully loved. Well, this psalm spells out in such beautiful detail that we are fully known and we are fully loved by God. He knows us in detail and he loves us in detail. When I was reading through this psalm yesterday, it was so resonating to me because of all that I've been reflecting on for the last month. Even beginning in verse 1, "O Lord, you have searched me, you have known me, you know when I sit down, you know when I rise up, you discern my thoughts from afar. You know everything there is to know about me, not just my past and my present, but my future. You know the words that are going to come out of my mouth before they come out of my mouth," he says. "You know me in detail. You search out my path and my lying down. You are acquainted with all of my ways. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me." And then he goes on to say, "Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. I can't contain this idea that you are that good, that you know me in that much detail, that you're that good." The person in this world who knows you the best, I don't know who that is for you, but the person in this world who knows you the best does not know you the way God knows you. And the person in this world who loves you the most does not love you the way God loves you. God knows you. He formed you, he made you, he designed you, he hardwired you specifically, he tailored you for his own purposes. And he loves everything he has made, everything. J.I. Packer once said, and this is such a great quote. I found it like 6 years ago for the first time and wondered how I missed it for so many years. He said, "There is tremendous relief," listen to this, "there is tremendous relief in knowing that God's love for me is utterly realistic, based at every point on prior knowledge of the worst of me. So that no discovery about me can now disillusion God the way I am so often disillusioned about myself." That's what the psalmist is saying. That's exactly what the psalmist is saying. That's what this psalm is about. It's this quote from Packer, "There is tremendous relief in knowing that God's love for me is utterly realistic, based at every point on prior knowledge of the worst of me." In other words, God knew the worst of you before you were born. He knew the worst things you would think, the worst things you would do, the worst things you would fail to do. He knows you in detail. And his love for you is not determined by that stuff, and it's never going to change. It's not as if God will at some point go, "Wait a second, hold on a minute. I feel like I've made a mistake here. I thought you were this, and now that I've discovered you're that, I can't love you anymore." We spend so much time and energy asserting and assuming that there are certain kinds of people God cannot love. But spending any time on that is a fool's errand. God, as you've heard me say 10,000 times, and if I live another 50 years, I'll say it 10,000 more times, but God loves and uses bad and weak people who fail because there aren't any other kinds of people. So that no discovery, Packer says, no discovery can now disillusion God the way I am so often disillusioned about myself. I mean, look at verses 13 through 16. These are some well-known verses. "For you formed my inward parts. You made me in detail." Your desires, your personality, the things that make you laugh, the food that you like, the kind of person that you want to be around. I mean, God made you that specifically, tailored you. "You knitted me together in my mother's womb." In my mother's womb, you knitted me together. "I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made," the psalmist says. "Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. You knew my days before I lived one day." in other words. I just can't help but think about, now let me qualify this by saying, I'm very grateful for the family that I grew up in, and I'm very grateful for the home that I grew up in. I'm grateful for my parents, I'm grateful for my siblings, I'm grateful for my extended family. I'm grateful for all of it. I really, really am. And I was telling Stacy yesterday that the longer that I live and the more people I talk to, I realize just how rare it is that I was given what I was given. And I'm appreciating that in a brand new way these days. But that doesn't mean everything was easy. It wasn't easy. If you were here the morning my mom and I were on stage, then you'll know that there was just as much dysfunction in our family as there was in any other family. It may have looked different. We may have experienced it differently, but there was still brokenness and dysfunction and heartache and frustration and confusion and misunderstanding and all of that stuff. But even though all of that stuff was present, when I think about the detailed way in which God not only formed me and made me and designed me, but brought me into this world and put me under the care of a particular mother and a particular father, my dad's, what would have been his 83rd birthday was this past Friday. He died in 2010. And it would have been his 83rd birthday, which means he died. If you do the math, it may not come out this way in your mind, but he died at 70 and a half is when he died. You've probably heard me talk about him more than you've heard me talk about any other human being because he had such an impact on me. My dad told me he loved me all the time. Every time I would walk in a room, he would get up, he would hug me, he called me honey to the day he died. He would kiss me on both cheeks because he was European and that was the custom there. He was affectionate, he was funny, he was caring, he was loving, he was all of those things. And when I hear stories, friends tell me stories, you tell me stories about dads who you kind of knew loved you but never said it, it saddens me. And it makes me appreciate what God gave me. He was a broken man and he was a sinner just like the rest of us, but I thank God for that. I've been thanking God for my mom and for the specific ways in which God made me and the desires he gave me and the path my life has taken. When I read through this psalm yesterday, I thought God knew me before the foundation of the earth. Ephesians 1 says that he not only knew us before the foundation of the earth, he loved us before the foundation of the earth. Loved us. He loved you before there was a you. He made you, designed you to love you. I hate that we typically have to wander away, get lost, lose big, and screw up before we can realize just how amazing God's grace is. But that's the way it almost always happens, you know? One reason God lets you hit walls is so that his love and his faithfulness will be proven to you again and again and again. If you're always good and you're always doing the right thing and someone tells you God loves you, well, you expect that. Well, why wouldn't he love me? I'm doing good things and I'm a pretty good person. God's love for you is not proven when you're being faithful. God's love for you is proven when you're being faithless. His love for you is not proven when you're being good. His love for you is proven when you're being bad, when you failed, when you screw up, when you lose. And one reason God lets you hit walls is so that his love and faithfulness will be proven to you again and again and again. I've known about God's love and I've known about God's faithfulness my whole life. People have told me about God's love and God's faithfulness my entire life. And I'm so grateful for that. But it wasn't until I hit rock bottom. It wasn't until I came to the end of myself and crashed and burned and failed miserably that God's love, the unconditionality of his love was proven to me in a brand new, bright, and liberating way. Because as people were walking away, God was moving in even closer. I know things about God's love and faithfulness now that I would have never known had life always been good and easy. Look at what he says in verse 11 and 12. He says, if I say, surely the darkness shall cover me and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. What a beautiful line. It's not as if darkness has power over God. It's not as if there's some cosmic tug of war battle going on in secret places between God and the devil. And on good days, God is winning, and on bad days, the devil's winning. It's not as if your depression, it's not as if your sadness, your grief, your frustration, your inability to overcome your addiction or bad habit or whatever the case may be, your broken heart. It's not as if those things are too big for God to handle. Even the darkness is not dark to you, O God, he says. Even the night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. Have you ever felt the darkness? You're despairing because things aren't turning out the way you'd hoped with this particular person or in this particular relationship. You're fearful because something's happening in your life physically or relationally that you can't seem to control and you can't seem to fix. And you start feeling this sort of foreboding encroachment of darkness. Have you ever felt desperate for help? Desperate for mercy, desperate to feel clean? I have. I have felt paralyzed by guilt. I have been crippled at different times by regret. I have felt hopeless in the wake of personal collapse. Convinced that life is over. My life as I knew it is over, and my best days are now behind me. I'll never recover from this, ever. I've lived with the incapacitating fear that I've ruined my life and I've ruined the lives of those that I love. I've felt the dirt of my sin stick to me in ways that made me despair of ever feeling clean again. I've felt that darkness that the psalmist talks about. Who likes feeling dirty? Who likes dealing with an unclean conscience? Who likes to deal with rumbling regrets and monstrous memories of things that you've done or things you wish you would have done? Who likes to remember the cruel things we've said to our spouse or our kids when we're angry, or the things we've done and thought in secret? That stuff plagues all of us at some level, at different times and in different ways. This psalm gives us the words we need when we feel disqualified from God's love. It reminds us that we're not just fully known, but we're fully loved. Fully. My life story proves that it is impossible to outrun the pursuing affection of God. My life proves that God is a God of great expenditure who spares no expense to pursue fugitives of grace like me. None. He relentlessly endures our sense of entitlement. He absorbs our rebellion, and he keeps coming after us until our hearts melt under the heat of his love. That is who he is. And over the last month, I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. Being freshly acquainted with the fact that I haven't earned God's love. I don't deserve God's love. In fact, I'm self-aware enough to know that I've done everything to disqualify myself from receiving God's love. throughout my life, every sin in thought, word, or deed, in the words of R.C. Sproul, is an act of cosmic treason, okay? So just in case you might think, well, I haven't done anything really bad. I've had my ups and downs in life, and I haven't been perfect, but for the most part, I've kept the straight and narrow. Any selfishness that has ever been expressed at any point in time in your life, any good deed that has been left undone, or any bad deed, thought, word, deed that you've done, is an act of cosmic treason. In other words, it doesn't matter whether your life's been good or bad, hard or easy. We're all desperate for mercy, desperate for God's grace. And God relentlessly endures all of this stuff, and he just keeps coming after us until our hearts melt under the heat of his love, which is never ending. I think it's been two things: God's love for me and his faithfulness to me for 50 years that has moved me the most as I've pondered that and reflected on that for the last month. His faithfulness is overwhelming to me, overwhelming. When I think about how faithful God has been in the face of my faithlessness, when I think about how gracious God has been in the face of my guilt, it's overwhelming to me. And in reality, it fuels my faith because it helps me to go, when I face things in the future, to go, look at who God has been my entire life. Look at what he's done. Look at how he's come through. Look at the way he's cared for me when I've been at my worst. Look at the way he has just tenderly watched over me and provided for me when I've been at my worst. Look at who God is. Look at what he's done. His faithfulness to me is great. It's amazing. And his love. I have never been unloved. Never. Never by God. I've been unloved as you have by lots of other people. I've been unfriended and unloved. And so have you by other people. But we've never been unloved by God. Never. I mean, I know that sounds so basic. Think about that for a second. You've never, ever been unloved by God. And you will never be unloved by God. Other people's love for you may wane, may fail and falter, but God's love for you is a non-blinking kind of love. It's unconditional. He's always loved you, always. And he always will love you. I wrote this a while back now. Gosh, it's got to be 10 years. And I had to make some edits to update the ages, my age in particular. And I've read a portion of this to you guys before, so maybe you've heard this, but as I was finishing up my prep last night, it was this piece that I wrote so many years ago that came to mind, because I think even more so now, it describes the way I feel than even when I wrote it. When I was 25, I believed I could change the world. I set out to change the world. I was on a mission to change the world. Well, at 50, I've now come to the realization that I can't change much of anything, to say nothing of the world. I can't change my kids, my spouse, you guys. I can't change anything, much less the world. Try as I might, I have not been able to manufacture outcomes the way I thought I could, either in my own life or other people's lives. Unfulfilled dreams, the loss of friendships, divorce, failure, the death of loved ones, remaining bad habits, whatever it is for you, live long enough, lose enough, suffer enough, and the idealism of youth fades, leaving behind the reality of life in a broken world as a broken person. Life has had a way of proving to me that I'm not on the constantly moving forward escalator of progress that I thought I was on when I was 25. I mean, when you were younger, did you just not assume that you were just going to get better and better and wiser and more capable and competent? Why is it that just about the time you feel like you've mastered the universe, God reminds you that you haven't? Okay, that was me. I mean, I was at the top of my game, midlife, early 40s. God had to remind me that I was still desperate for mercy and in dire need of His grace. Instead, my life has looked more like this: try and fail, fail then try and succeed, succeed then fail. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 3 steps back. Every year I get better at some things and worse at others. Some areas remain stubbornly static. I still get annoyed by long lines and bad drivers. That hasn't changed at all. To complicate matters even more, when I honestly acknowledge the ways I've gotten worse, it's actually a sign that I may be getting better. And when I become proud of the ways I've gotten better, it's actually a sign that I've gotten worse. And on we go. Round and round we go. Well, if this sounds like a depressing sentiment, it isn't. Quite the opposite. If I am grateful for anything about these past 25 years, it's for the way God has wrecked my idealism about myself and the world and replaced it with a realism about the extent of His grace and His love, which is much bigger than I could have ever hoped for or ever imagined. One poet put it like this: the love of God is greater far than tongue or pen can ever tell. It goes beyond the highest star and reaches to the lowest hell. Could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. His love for you is everlasting. It began before the foundation of the earth, and it will continue on through eternity. God is the best friend you will ever have. He's the greatest lover of your soul that you could ever hope for. And I have been so grateful over the last month for the people that God has gifted me with and the redemption that I have seen in my life over and over and over again. I've said this before, but I am not alive and standing before you today because in my darkest and worst moments, I held on to God. That is not why I'm here. I've let go of God 10 trillion times. The reason I'm alive and standing before you today is because God has never once let go of me, even though I have tried so many times to wiggle away from Him in rebellion and stupidity and foolishness and selfishness. And He's never blinked. I was telling my son a number of months ago, my oldest son a number of months ago, we were talking about God, and I was giving him reasons why I believe in God, because sometimes he struggles to believe in something or someone he's never seen or had a verbal conversation with where he could hear the other person speaking. And I gave him some reasons why I believe in God, went through some of the typical arguments for the existence of God. But I said, at the end of the day, Gabe, the primary reason I believe in God is because he's the best friend I have ever had, man. I've had people come and people go. In some cases, the reason people have left has been because of me. In other cases, people have left because it's been them. I've screwed things up. I've blown it on so many different occasions in so many different ways. I've hurt people. I've been hurt by people. Seasons come and seasons go. God has remained the same. His steadfast love endureth forever. And I don't know where you are right now. I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's either scaring you or frustrating you or making you feel unsafe or unloved. I don't know what's causing you to feel increasingly insecure. I don't know. I don't know. What I do know is this. I know that when all the chips are down and when all is said and done and when all the dust settles, God is with you. He made you for himself. He designed you specifically for himself. All of the details that make you who you are were crafted meticulously by God. He knows you. He loves you. He's always known you. He's always loved you. And like I said before, he knows you better than anybody and loves you more than anybody could. And my hope and my prayer for you and for me, quite honestly, is that that's something I'll never forget. Ever. Let's pray.